TJ Bain of PrimeRevenue. Welcome.
Thanks, Bob. It's great to join you. I hope you and yours are staying safe, healthy, and strong.
Thank you. Now, you guys have reviewed thousands of invoices in recent weeks, and I'm just wondering, what does that tell you about what's going on in China with regard to the possible recovery of China's manufacturing base?
So we've seen some interesting things that have happened in China. We saw a very dramatic dip associated with the shutting down of China right around the time. The shutdown actually occurred at almost exactly the same time that China was going out on a Lunar New Year holiday. And that shutdown, we typically see that shutdown every year in our data. This year we saw that shutdown. We actually saw China come back for a very brief period of time, a couple of days. Many of the provinces had already been shut down, and the shutdown was expanding through the course of what is typically a 2-week lunar holiday period, Lunar New Year holiday period. We saw a rapid decline down to virtually zero. And I say virtually zero. We did see some industry sectors that were relatively unaffected during that period of time, but there was a dramatic decrease down to virtually zero for what we typically see in China for an extended period of time. And then we saw China come back online within the first couple of weeks of March, slowly progress back to where they were in 2019. That is different than the beginning of the year. And the first part of the year prior to the Lunar New Year and late in the fourth quarter, China was actually up dramatically. The first part of the year, the first several weeks of January, were up 28%, I believe was our number, over prior year. So we have yet to see them get back up to that level. But as of around March 14th or 15th, they exceeded 2019 levels, and they've been holding steady for the most part until the past few days.
Well, you're saying they didn't meet the surge so far of early January, but wasn't that upping manufacturing in anticipation of the New Year's break, perhaps?
Well, remember that's year over year. The Lunar New Year does fall a little bit, and we've looked at the data both ways. So that would have been taking into account prior year, which would have been year over year. So it doesn't really accommodate for that. We view it as just good times in China.
Mm-hmm. Of course, if they're coming back up to speed on manufacturing, and yet the consumption is not coming back here in the United States and North America, that certainly has to bode ill for the supply chain. We're looking, are we not, at quite a huge buildup of inventory if the pipeline is open at that end, but it's not open at this end?
So there is a buildup. It depends on which industries you're talking about where the inventory could be built up. And I think that's probably a very specific, obviously, certain sectors of food, retail, consumer products that people can get to their home, medical supplies. Those supply chains are largely depleted, and it is very difficult to get the goods to flow. So if goods aren't flowing, you have a lot of problems, and we see that through the platform. So we're seeing approved invoices, obviously, and when the goods aren't flowing, the invoices aren't flowing, the approvals not happening, and we're starting to see that very dramatically. So we actually we saw a downward trend. So what I just talked about was the invoices that have been approved after orders have been received, they've been manufactured, and they've been shipped. Over the course of March, we saw a slow decline in the demand, meaning that the orders were starting to tail a bit. And then really within the last few days, we've seen a dramatic impact. Supply chains and volumes of approved invoices on a global basis are probably off between 30 and 40%. Some sectors are off dramatically. We have a number of clients in automotive, for instance, that have completely closed their plants for some period of time, some for 2 weeks, some for 6 weeks. It's going to have a very big, dramatic impact on the orders that their suppliers are receiving and the volumes that we'll see across the platform. We're starting to see that now. It will take another few weeks for that to filter through the supply chains.
What about where it's coming from? You're reviewing invoices from all over the world. Like last year and up until this crisis, were you starting to see any evidence of a shift of sourcing, or is it just all China all the time?
No, we actually see a shift of sourcing. So we've actually been monitoring the data that we have. We can look at the source of the order or the fulfillment of the order. So we're able to look at the volumes on the platform by where the buyer is purchasing them from, as well as where the supplier is delivering those from. So we've seen dramatic drop-offs in countries that have been, very adversely affected. Italy, Spain is going through a very difficult time. France has been going through a very difficult time. And so we're watching those things right now and looking for early warning signs in these regions, as we saw in early March from China. In the past week, we've probably been much more focused on the data that we're seeing, indicating a dramatic increase in suppliers needing to get early payment or electing to sell their invoices early. And there's some very interesting implications in that data. I think especially as the government struggle with what the right stimulus packages are.
To the extent you can even predict this, do you think there might be some permanent changes down the road in terms of financing terms and the way in which trade finance is practiced between the United States and offshore locations after the pandemic is over, and even if economic recovery comes? A new normal of types or not?
To a certain extent, I hope so. As a human being and as a business person, I hope so. We've seen some very unique, this is a unique a time in the history of the world. It's a unique time in all of our lives. I don't think any of us have seen. I certainly have lived through financial crises before. I graduated from university, from Georgia Tech in the early 90s. And, in the early 90s, you're going into a job market that's not that great. Lived through, Y2K and the crash that sort of came there, 9/11, the global financial crisis. But I was talking to one of my board members and a great counsel very early on in this crisis, and he raised a point that I haven't thought about, that I haven't stopped thinking about the entire time. And we're dealing with all of the implications of just a normal global financial crisis to the extent that none of us have seen before. But every single one of us is concerned and constantly thinking about our health and the health of our loved ones being at peril, and the health of our teams being at peril. We've had employees that have tested positive and are dealing with family members that are trying to fight this virus and fight through the recovery. Every single person on the planet is dealing with that right now, and especially in the developed countries that are not used to being on lockdown, this is running rampant. And so it's creating a little bit of an esprit de corps where people really are trying to figure out how to help each other survive. And one of the mantras that we have been consistent on since the very beginning is it's going to take the strong to help the less strong get through this. And so I do think we are spending a tremendous amount of time with our clients that are large buyers, that are in good liquidity positions, thinking about how we can mitigate risk, provide liquidity for their suppliers to survive, but also to plan on what we know is going to be a big slug of orders coming through the supply chain as we start to ramp back up plants to manufacture over-the-road trucks, plants to manufacture tires, plants to manufacture cars. Those plants that are down right now will deplete their inventories through this process and through the startup, and they know that we're going to have to refill the supply chains. We're going to have to bring back on the suppliers' facilities to get them back online. And so what I'm seeing at the moment is very encouraging, because there is an unprecedented cooperation, collaboration, and openness to share information that makes all of us together collectively stronger. And that's, in days where there needs to be good news, that's incredibly encouraging and inspiring and motivating to me.
Well, thank you for that good news, PJ. We certainly can use it right now. And thank you so much for giving us a snapshot of what's going on in China and how we might see a road to recovery going forward. Thank you for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it, and be safe. Please be safe and healthy.
You too.